Right now, two objects the size of football fields are racing around our planet at 17,000 miles an hour. One of them is dying, the other is growing. In less than 5 years, humanity's longest-running foothold in space, a laboratory built by 15 nations occupied without a single break for over 2 decades, will be deliberately steered into the Pacific Ocean and destroyed. And while that happens on the other side of the globe, a rival station is quietly doubling in size, preparing to become the largest government-run outpost humanity has ever put in orbit. So here's the question nobody in mission control wants to say out loud. When the International Space Station falls silent, who actually owns the sky? Today, we're tracing the entire story of humanity's space stations, from a leaking Soviet prototype in the 1970s to the billion-dollar commercial habitats being built right now, some targeting a launch as early as 2027. We'll show you why the ISS is being retired, what China is really building above our heads, and which private companies are racing to replace one of the most important structures ever built. By the end, you'll understand exactly what's about to happen to low Earth orbit and why it matters more than almost anyone realizes. It started with Salyut 1. In 1971, the Soviet Union launched the first space station in history, a cramped single-module tin meant to prove one simple thing, that humans could live in orbit, not just visit it. It worked, but barely. The first crew to dock with it couldn't even get the hatch open. The second crew got inside and never came home. A depressurization during reentry killed all three cosmonauts, the only human deaths that have ever occurred in space itself. That tragedy didn't end the program, it hardened it. Over the next 2 decades, the Soviets built station after station, Salyut 6, Salyut 7, each one more advanced, each one teaching engineers how to keep humans alive for months at a time. Then, in 1986, came Mir. It stayed in orbit for 15 years, hosted astronauts from a dozen countries, survived a fire, a collision, and a near-total loss of power. And it proved something the Americans hadn't yet, that a space station could be modular, built piece by piece, expanded almost indefinitely. That lesson became the blueprint for what came next. In 1998, the first module of the International Space Station reached orbit. It was supposed to be finished within a few years. It took over a decade, 16 nations, and more than 40 assembly missions before it became what astronauts now call the most complex machine ever built by human hands. But here's what most people don't realize: the ISS was never meant to last this long. It was originally certified for about 15 years, it's now approaching 30. And that's exactly the problem. Metal fatigues, seals degrade, microcracks spread through decades of thermal stress as the station swings from blistering sunlight to freezing shadow 16 times a day. NASA engineers have already found small air leaks in the Russian segment that have been slowly worsening for years. Think of it like an airplane that's flown far more hours than it was ever designed for. Every additional flight isn't just routine anymore, it's a calculated risk. That's why around 2030 or 2031, NASA plans to end the ISS on its own terms rather than wait for something to fail. SpaceX is building a specialized deorbit vehicle, essentially a controlled battering ram that will dock with the station and fire its engines at exactly the right moment to guide the entire quarter-million-pound structure into a safe, unpopulated stretch of the Pacific Ocean. The ISS isn't going to disappear in one dramatic instant, though. During reentry, much of the station will break apart and burn up in the atmosphere while the surviving debris falls into that carefully selected stretch of ocean. The reason for all this precision is simple. An uncontrolled reentry of something this large would create a completely different kind of problem. NASA isn't just ending the station, it's trying to control its final few hours. It sounds dramatic because it is, but that wasn't even the most surprising part of what's happening in orbit right now. While NASA plans a funeral, China is planning an expansion. Tiangong, China's own space station, reached full operational status in 2022 with 3 modules, Tian, Wenxin, and Mengxin. It's smaller than the ISS, but it's already hosted more than 24 taikonauts in continuous 6-month rotations. According to recent reports, it has also welcomed its first astronaut from Hong Kong, with candidates from Macau and Pakistan reportedly training for future missions, details worth watching as the program moves forward. China has confirmed plans to grow the station from 3 modules to 6, with reports pointing to that expansion beginning sometime around 2027. There are even plans to launch a dedicated space telescope, Zhenshan, that would fly alongside Tiangong and periodically dock with it for repairs and refueling, something Hubble never had the luxury of. That expansion matters for more than just size. A larger station means more docking opportunities, more laboratory space, and more room for experiments that are difficult or impossible to run on Earth. It also gives China something strategically valuable: an independent platform for human spaceflight that doesn't depend on NASA, Russia, or the ISS to keep operating. Here's the twist scientists didn't see coming a decade ago. If NASA's timeline holds and commercial stations aren't ready in time, Tiangong could temporarily become the only continuously crewed government-run space station left in orbit. But China and NASA aren't the only players in this race. And one of the companies in that race has an even more ambitious plan. It doesn't just want to replace the ISS. It wants to make orbit a place where ordinary paying customers can actually live and work. We'll get to exactly who that is in a moment. But first, here's what private companies are building right now, and it might be the strangest chapter of this story yet. NASA made a decision that would have sounded like science fiction 20 years ago. It decided it didn't want to own a space station anymore. Instead, the agency wants to become a customer, buying seats and lab space aboard privately owned stations, the same way it now buys rides on commercial rockets instead of building its own. That single decision triggered a genuine commercial space race. Axiom Space, which has already flown 4 private astronaut missions to the ISS, is building its own module to attach to the station first before detaching to fly independently. Blue Origin, Sierra Space, and Boeing are jointly developing Orbital Reef, an ambitious mixed-use business park in space designed for research, manufacturing, and even media production. With roughly 830 cubic meters of livable volume, Voyager Technologies is developing Starlab. And VAST, the company we mentioned a moment ago, is aiming to put the very first standalone commercial station, called Haven 1, into orbit on a Falcon 9 rocket, with a target date reported as early as 2027, to be followed by a crewed mission and a larger successor station designed for long-term private living and working in orbit. None of them have flown yet. All of them are racing the same deadline, the moment the ISS deorbits into the Pacific. And this is where the economics of orbit could change completely. A government station is built around national missions and scientific priorities. A commercial station has a different question to answer. Who is willing to pay for access? That could mean pharmaceutical experiments, manufacturing, private astronauts, tourism, media projects, or technologies designed specifically for a future Moon and Mars economy. If even one of these companies fails to deliver on time, there's a real possibility the United States could find itself without a single continuously crewed space station in orbit, for the first time since 2000. Meanwhile, Russia has its own plans for a station called ROSS, though it remains in the earliest stages of development. This isn't just a story about hardware. It's a story about who gets to define the next era of human presence beyond Earth and whether that era belongs to governments, corporations, or both. For 25 uninterrupted years, there has always been a light passing overhead with people inside it. That streak of near-continuous human presence in orbit is the longest unbroken stretch since our species first looked up and wondered what was out there. And in the next few years, that chain is going to be tested in a way it never has before: one station deliberately destroyed, another quietly doubling in size, and a handful of untested commercial habitats racing to fill the gap. Scientists currently believe the transition will be seamless, but spaceflight has a long history of humbling even the most confident predictions. Because the ISS was never just a place where astronauts lived. It was a test bed for the medical knowledge and technologies humanity will need farther from Earth. What replaces it won't simply determine where astronauts sleep. It could determine who gets to experiment, build, and make money in orbit for the next generation. So here's what we want to know. Do you think a commercial company can truly replace what a space agency built? And what do you think humanity's next space station should actually be built to do: research, tourism, or something we haven't even imagined yet? If this kind of evidence-based space storytelling is something you want more of, this is exactly what this channel is built for, so consider subscribing before the next one drops. And if you're still with us right now, wondering what happens the moment that final piece of the ISS disappears beneath the Pacific, like this video and tell us in the comments. When that day finally comes, do you think we'll be ready?